Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So, last time we spoke about some gendered relations, male, female, uh, should we vie for traditional relationships where, kind of hunter-gatherer type of thing. The man is the hunter, the woman is the gatherer, or the man is the breadwinner, the woman is the homemaker. Or should we sort of forego that type of model and look at a newer model? Okay. And I highlighted that part of the problem is that we haven't quite made up our minds what we want to do. That's really the problem. Because on the one hand, we inherited an entire genetic code makeup, entire system, entire systems of societal structures, hierarchies, etc., that originate in one or more sort of version of patriarchy. We also inherited legislation that by and large hold men accountable for things like maintenance, where fathers, can be forced by the court to maintain their children, and where women generally are able to sue men, for example, for maintenance in various countries. So I'm not gonna get into that, but what I'm basically just highlighting is that in general we've inherited norms, customs, and laws that come from a worldview that we have largely tried to undo in the last 60 years or so through feminism. Okay. But the problem is we haven't entirely been able to undo it, partly because feminism doesn't present itself as a robust ideology or a robust alternative to patriarchy. Rather, it's more like, sort of anarchist, who's just trying to dismantle a system but not presenting any alternative. So feminists are basically anarchists. If you look at it, they're opposing systems that have worked for thousands of years, by crying injustice, by saying that the system is unfair, that it unfairly privileges men. So, it reminds me of that spoiled kind of child, where, he doesn't look at, or he or she, a kid, obviously, they don't look at what they have or in ways that they have been privileged, but they look at someone else and what the other person has and says, wow, it's so unfair that I don't have rollerblades, for example. Okay, but then just last week they got a bicycle. Just giving an example, right? So it's kind of that scenario where people are trying to pick apart a system based on little segments that are considered unfair, then legislation moving in and making adjustments to that system to give more rights to women, but then essentially undermining the components on which the system functions or is able to function smoothly on. So things are scaffolded. Any system in the world is scaffolded, and various components interact with one another to make the system work. So that's true for traditional patriarchy, and that system has obviously been gradually picked apart, and now we have something lopsided, but we have not succeeded in actually coming up with another robust system or replacing the old traditional system. We have modified it somewhat, and the modifications has not been very successful in balancing things out, because basically all we've done was scream foul, give women more rights, and not couple those rights with obligations. So still obligating the man, right? But taking away the means by which he is supposed to fulfill those obligations we obligated him with to begin with. So one of the things I want to kind of highlight is that jobs. Okay, let's talk about jobs, because we said, okay, we conceded that if women are to work, and indeed women do work, and if they can earn more than men, which indeed quite a number of women do earn more than men, although men overall generally earn more than women, there are women who earn more than men. Okay, so when we look at these things, the question arises, the question basically is that we still expect men to be providers, okay? Whether it is the modern woman or the traditional woman, the Western woman, the Eastern woman, doesn't matter what type of woman. Women in general largely require men to be providers, especially when they are going to get married, okay? Now, the question I'm asking you guys, is that unfair? Okay, I mean, who says that is unfair? Okay, and who says that is absolutely fair? And so many people, I've had this discussion with lots of both men and women, and many men and women, believe that it's absolutely a requirement for the man to provide for the woman. It's an absolute requirement. It's non-negotiable. It's a deal breaker if this does not take place, if the man does not provide for the woman. Now, there's a few things I want to discuss around this idea of men providing, okay? Firstly, I myself am a man, a husband. I do provide for my family. My wives are housewives. They do not work. They raise kids. I run a very traditional Muslim home, okay? However, that is becoming increasingly harder for men to do. Why? Okay, and this is the thing that I want especially women to take note of. Okay, in the past, the economy functioned largely off of male labor. Male labor. Women were generally not part of the broader economy, and were homemakers. Now, what that facilitated was men demanding to earn a wage or a salary that is manageable or can facilitate his looking after the family, okay? So he had to earn a livable wage, and a livable wage in that context means that you bring home enough money to be able to look after your family. That's a livable wage, okay? In a one-income home, that is a livable wage, okay? Now, because that was the norm, because men were the breadwinners, and it was normal for men to be breadwinners, and women did not bring in any significant income, they were not seen as economic contributors, at least not financially contributing to the economy, because it's not that they were not contributing to society, they were just not contributing to the economy in that way. They were not economic entities like men. So when with this type of scenario, men earned enough money to be able to maintain a family, okay? Because it was the checks and balances, the demand and supply, the what was considered acceptable and not acceptable in the workplace kind of balanced out by and large, where no man would accept to work for a wage less than what would be feasible, okay, given his duties and responsibilities towards his family. Okay, so in that type of economy, it was more feasible for a man to be the sole breadwinner, because that's what all men did. Okay, moving forward, fast forward, feminism, equality, gender equity, etc. And we have a situation where now women by law are required, to occupy half the jobs in many countries. What happens in that instance? Okay, I'm going to break it down for you, real simple. And basically what happens in that instance is, now the economy adjusts itself, okay? Now suddenly, the job that the man did, okay, for X amount, for a certain wage, right, can be done by a woman for much less. Why can it be done for much less? Because originally, the woman in the workplace enters the workplace with a mindset that she's earning money either, number one, for herself, or number two, to be a kind of auxiliary income for the household. So her income is not the main income. The husband's income is the main income. And so she can work for much less. She's prepared to settle for much less money. She's prepared to work for much less money. Okay? So what does that do? Okay? It devalues the labor of the man. He can no longer ask for this amount of money, for a larger sum of money, when other people, women entering the job market, are prepared to do the same job for much less. So if he was asking $10 for his labor, okay, now women entering the market are asking for $2 and $3 for the same labor, okay? And they can do that because they're not providing the main income for the household, or they're working only for themselves, okay? So what happens in the long run, okay? Men start earning less. It's either you're going to earn less or you're not going to have a job, okay? The negotiation structure changes, the pay structure changes. So either men have to earn less to have a job or be without a job. So, I mean, what are you going to do, right? You are forced now to earn less. You are not anymore negotiating with other men who all, like you, are responsible for families. You are now negotiating with women who, unlike you, are not the main breadwinners for their families. Okay, so they are prepared to settle for less, which means now you have to settle for less as a man. Okay, what does that mean? It means that the wife's income, okay, is no longer an added bonus, an optional extra on top of your income, right? To buy some luxuries or go on a trip or whatever. But now the wife's income becomes a necessity, because your $10 that you were earning has now become $7, okay? And your wife is now earning $3. So both of you together, okay, bring home $10. Whereas before, you by yourself, the man, brought home $10, okay? So that's what happens in the long run, okay? So nature sorts out the bullshit, basically, okay? The laws of economics, demand and supply, sorts out the bullshit, okay? In the sense that first, women argued that it was their right to work. Well, guess what? Now it's your obligation. Okay? Now it's about dual income homes because it has to be, because you made it that way. Okay? Because the employer is now getting two for the price of one, basically. Okay? Because the scenario has changed. Okay? So when this happens, it becomes the norm for employers to expect there to be something like a dual income home. It becomes a norm for banks, even when you go for home loans, for there to be a dual income home. Dual income is now the standard, basically, for married couples. Dual income home. What does that say for traditional homes? Okay? It means that only very wealthy men or very wealthy families still maintain traditional homes and still get married, in fact. Okay? Because for the most part, marriages survive better on traditional family structures where the man is the breadwinner and the wife is the homemaker. Right? But wives in middle class or middle to lower class, which is by and large the majority of people, right, cannot function on that structure because both of them need to work to sustain a family. Okay? Which leads to a lot of problems further down the line. It leads to problems with kids not being raised by parents because the parents are not around, because they're trying to work, earn enough money for these kids. It leads to household problems because both people, in order to sustain the married relationship, basically have to work their butts off, are always exhausted, and don't have time for each other, don't have time for their household, don't really have time for their kids, and are just trying to survive. So these type of things kind of sort themselves out. So basically what I'm saying is that when people are shouting rights, 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 we want this right, we want that right, this is our right, this is our right, whether you want to accept the obligation and responsibility that goes along with that right or not, you are going to eventually. Okay? Something's got to give. It'll come to bite you in the ass eventually. Okay? And that's basically what's happened. Okay? People have shouted, it's the woman's right to work. And guess what? From it being her right, now it's her obligation. And so that's basically what I want to point out when it comes to jobs. And I'm not advocating in any way that women should not work. I'm only just stating the obvious. I'm pointing it out there. I'm saying, look, this is what happened. This is how it is. What are we going to do about it? Okay? For my part, I generally think that my children are more important to me than anyone's sense of independence and freedom. And so primary caregiver is the mother, and I believe in the mother assuming her primary role as a mother, even over and above being a wife, for that matter, because as a man, my children feature greatly and are the most important people to me, and so I would not want them to be underprivileged, and I believe it is their right to have a primary caregiver in the home. So one thing also I noticed that is often neglected in this whole sort of scramble for rights and women's rights and women's liberation and all this feminist jargon and arguments and ideologies out there, is that very, very rarely do we talk about children's rights, you know? And if anything, you know, an adult man and an adult woman, you know, should be talking about responsibilities, because we are adults after all, you know? And the ones whose rights we should be emphasizing are children's rights, because children are not accountable, you know, and are not held responsible for anything until they become adults, you know, and they are the ones that alone possess rights, you know, without defined responsibilities. So I think we should switch things up a bit. You know, we should kind of broaden the picture and emphasize again that women are primary caregivers, that they are better suited for that, and that it would be refreshing and actually at some level very necessary